Hi, and welcome to FFF Podcast. I'm Jim Hochberg. We're going to talk about freedom. We're going to talk about liberty. And we're going to talk today about whether the citizens of this country are allowing those original concepts to be eroded so greatly that we may be losing both. Let's discuss that. So hi, Eva.
Hey, Jim. How goes it?
Fabulous.
Oh, really? So we're almost to the middle of August now, and a lot of crazy things have been happening in the news. So what are we going to talk about today?
I just told you.
I know, but let's get more into detail.
So there's three different articles that I think we can draw from to ask the question. The Founding Fathers gave us a country where the law, by the structure of the Constitution, kept the federal government out of our business and allowed the states and the local governments to make the rules that we live by basically on a day-to-day basis.
For good reason, I might add.
Well, and our religious foundation allowed the freedom and liberty to be. And the question is, we're going to look at these three articles, one having to do with a federal court judge nominee who is very anti-religious liberty. A second article having to do with a critique of the Sound of Freedom movie. And the third being a Mark Levins criticism of the Department of Justice. Have things changed so much in this country because we're not paying attention that we're kind of that proverbial frog that was in the cold water on the stove that's been heated up, and the freedom and liberty of that frog is being boiled away. And I think we need to talk about that. So that's kind of the way I'm going to pitch it.
And that's really good, because what I keep hearing over and over again when people contact my office is some people are just so tired of all of this stuff, Jim, that they don't want to plug in anymore. They don't want to listen to the news anymore. They don't want to vote. They don't care about what's happening at the legislature. When I say they don't care, it doesn't mean that they're not upset about what's taking place. They, especially here in Hawaii, they just don't feel like it's going to make a difference.
And every time
they get involved.
Every time somebody contacts you with that spirit, you always say, I'm sure. Well, you need to read Article 1, Section 1 of the state constitution, because it says all political power is inherent in the people, and they need to exercise that political power in order to keep control of their government. So they can't get so tired of it that they fail to exercise their political power.
I think what I try to do, and you know this because you and I have worked together for a long time, what I try to do first is when I talk to somebody that feels overwhelmed like that, I acknowledge that there is a reason they feel that way, right? I don't want to dismiss their feeling that their plugging is not going to make a difference. But then what I try to do is encourage them that if they stay plugged in, there's probably a lot of people out there that feel the way they do. And if one person rises to the challenge, they're going to find that other people are rising with them. And the next thing you know, those little things become a big thing, and that could create change.
Okay, grasshopper.
Well, okay, and that kind of ties into this thing that's happening with this potential nominee, Loren AliKhan. Yes,
and she's being nominated for a trial court, federal court judge. That means that she will be in the district court, which is where the trials are in the geographic area that she's in, which happens to be Washington, D.C. She's not an appellate judge. She's a beginner federal judge, but it is a lifetime appointment. Mm-hmm. It's not for a period of time with a term limit. All federal judges are appointed for life because the founders figured taking politics out of the judiciary, because they don't have to get reappointed, will make a judiciary that is political free.
So I think people in Hawaii, they kind of don't really pay this much attention, because here in Hawaii, our local judges are appointed. They're not, they don't have.
We don't elect any judges.
We don't elect. So you don't see the process. But you make a very good point that I think people need to really hone in on, that these federal appointments could affect Hawaii based on where they're getting appointed. I mean, maybe she wouldn't, right? Because of where she's going to be appointed to. But overall, all of these judges will ultimately.
So she's been nominated by President Biden to be a new district court federal judge, which is supposed to be free from politics. But her 11 years working as an attorney has shown, because of the cases that she took, what her politics are.
Oh my God. I'm having flashbacks to the show last week when we talked about that you have to stay on top of what people are doing because that shows you what they believe in, right?
And the thing about her is what she believes in is that religious liberty has to be curtailed. And so this letter that was written by First Liberty was dated July 12th, 2023. And it was addressed to the chairman of the Senate Committee on the Judiciary and Honorable Dick Durbin, who's a Democrat, and the ranking member Senate Committee on the Judiciary, which is Lindsey Graham. But it was signed by 15 other major national religious leaders. You want to go point out some of the ones you liked?
Well, actually, a lot of these are people we would expect, right? Like, obviously, Kelly Shackelford from the First Liberty Institute.
Well, he wrote the letter.
And Kelly Shackelford he comes from the FPC background. I want people to know that.
He comes from the Rutherford Institute background. Well, he and I were Rutherford guys way back.
Yes, but he also was part of the FPC movement. Concerned Women for America. You've got the National Religious Broadcasters, Christian Legal Society,
Matt
Heritage.
Staver, we had him on the show once.
We did. Heritage Foundation, Family Research Council, Eagle Forum. I was surprised that I didn't see the Family Policy Alliance on here. Normally, they sign. They didn't on this particular one. But I mean, the American Principles Project, and there are others, but
Tea Party Patriots, the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty, Faith and Freedom Coalition.
So these are important big groups, and I want to.
But they're not. They're connected together in that they all exercise religious freedom in this country.
And to be fair, because I like to be fair, I got to say that this Judge Loren AliKhan, she is consistent. She wants to take away religious freedom from everybody. She don't care.
As I am on the opposite end of the spectrum. And people, if I was nominated to be nominated by the president to be a federal judge, they could easily come up with the ACLU could say you can't let Hoper do that because he keeps defending religious freedom.
And so to be fair, I just want to say that at least she's consistent. She wants to strike religious freedom from everybody. She doesn't care if you're a Sikh or whether you're a Christian or Buddhist or whatever. She wants all of that gone.
She is a devotee probably of our friend Mitch Kale. And if you don't remember Mitch Kale, look him up. Kahle.
All right.
Friend of mine. Hi, Mitch.
Okay, so
So anyway, the first article is just to point out that within our judicial system, which is supposed to be on the federal level free of politics is so entrenched now in the nomination of judiciary appointments that 15 religious liberty organizations have to write to the Senate Judiciary Committee and say, don't give this lady the job. And that's the point of this.
Right. And
rather than the specifics.
And her nomination, she actually made it out of committee. It was a party line vote. It was very close. So now it's going to move to the full Senate for a vote. And this is where listeners and viewers.
Yep.
So all of our listeners and viewers now, and I don't care what state you're from. It doesn't matter now. Now we're at the point where your senator is going to be making this decision. Jim,
our senators will be voting, 10 times if I can.
Now, having said that, though, we're not saying don't make contact. I mean, they probably will support her nomination, but I still think that we have a duty and a responsibility to raise your concerns. I think the concerns that we should have as people of faith is that this judge has made it very, very clear that there should be no benefits to you if you are a person of faith.
Now, how many senators in the Congress are religious? Probably a lot. And we know that a bunch of the ones that wave their Catholic flags are also pro-abortion. So I'm not sure how to weigh that.
But I wonder if our Democratic friends that have strong faith, right? We've got some squad members that are very strong faith members in their own faith. So let's see how they kind of watch what happens, because again, this is not just against Christians.
You want to bet
Hawaii
me $1?
Family Forum does not support gambling in any form. So no, I will not bet $1.
I'll bet -$. That means if you win, you pay.
All right. So
that's not gambling. That's like losing.
So before we move on to the next one, why don't you give a call to action? What are you asking people to do on this particular issue?
So number one, please pay attention and wake up. This stuff is going on. How is it possible in a country with the founding fathers and the religious foundation they built this Constitution on, that it could become this way? Because we haven't been paying attention for 100 years.
All that good people have to do for bad laws to get enacted is to do nothing.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening.
But do contact your senators, Mazie Hirono and Mr. Schatz.
Stop. That is not his thing. Jim, come on, be respectful.
And tell them that you don't want an anti-religious person as a judge. It's a lifetime appointment. You can't remove her when she makes bad decisions. And she's argued terribly bad positions that the United States Supreme Court unanimously disagreed with her. And
Jim and I will do an update once this vote takes place in the Senate.
So then the second thing about how is it that we're giving away the foundation that made our country full of freedom and liberty? How are we doing it? This movie, A Sound of Freedom,
which is a fantastic movie for those of you.
I haven't seen yet, but I've heard tremendous things about it.
What I will do is I will put, so those of you listening on the radio, check the links on the bottom, because they're offering free tickets. There are people that have donated so that people can go see this movie, because what has happened is the movie was doing so well that they started to, what they always do when they don't want something to get out, right? It's being offered in less and less theaters. So make sure you check that link, because you may be able to see the movie for free.
So what the movie's about, from a person who hasn't seen it, me, is it's about a guy who is trying to save kids that are being trafficked in the sex trade.
And I happen to know for a fact that Calvary Chapel Pearl Harbor is going to have this show on August 20th. So if you're watching this and you want to see it and you don't want to go to the movie theater, check it out at Calvary Pearl Harbor on August 20th.
I didn't know that.
Now you know.
Hey.
The more you know.
So it's basically a movie about the fact and the experience of kids that are trafficked in the sex trade across the border from South American countries or wherever. And, it's a movie. So it's the trials and travails to make it meaningful and emotional. It's a story, right? It's a movie. It's not a news report. So anyway, a guy wrote a critique, and this guy's name is Noah Berlasky. And he said, this movie's terrible because it's unrealistic. Most sex trafficked people are not kids. Like, I guess they were under 10 or something in the movie. And he cited all these statistics saying that most kids that are trafficked are, 17, 18 and older, which 17 is still a minor. But, he said it was totally unrealistic. But here's the interesting thing. I want to read a quote. He says that the messages in the movie, quote, create coalitions. And now when I heard that word, I thought groups of people.
Right.
It's not.
Okay.
So don't get sidetracked on the rabbit hole of coalitions. There's a bunch of people. No. Coalitions of feeling, disgust, and righteous rage. So it's kind of an odd phrase. I had to read it several times before it made sense. I kept going off into groups of people doing things. So he says the messages in the movie create coalitions of feeling, disgust, and righteous rage that connect conservative conspiracy theorists with the mainstream. Why does that have to be related to a movie about the terrible consequences of sex trafficking kids? Well, so there's this article in CatholicVote.org by Hannah Heister. Very interesting. She says that he actually has an agenda of his own. And I want to tie his agenda into the concept of losing our freedom and liberty because we're losing the religious foundation of our country.
Because I think in the article, where their concern comes in is because of this particular person's connection with some statements made about pedophilia.
Correct.
That's where we have to be concerned because, again, going back to the point that if you know what someone believes and what they're putting their energy into and what kind of statements they're making publicly, this is going to give you the ammunition you need to either support this person or to oppose them. And on this particular person, that is what's concerning.
And so when I point my finger at Mr. Berlasky about why he says these things, I've got three fingers pointing back at me. How is it that defending pedophilia becomes a platform upon which to critique a really good movie trying to help us stop sex trafficking of minors by putting it into the consciousness through a movie? What have we done? How did our society grow from, I'm only 65 years old, I'll be 66 in October. When I was a kid, people didn't even talk publicly about those things.
Well, that's because now we're into a belief system where whatever is good for me is good for me. Whatever is good for you is good for you. And we don't correct people anymore. I can't tell you what's wrong and right.
That has led to a very not good place.
Which is why people of faith, we stand on scripture values because they are unchanging.
Correct.
So our belief systems as people of faith, it doesn't sway with the wind. We don't go based on what people feel today, right? Correct. I mean, the bottom line is that what is good and what is true and what is pure, these are the things that we are called to think upon.
And always the standard test in Christianity is you are created in the image and likeness of God. We live in a fallen world, so nobody exists in the image and likeness of God anymore because of original sin. So we have these emotions and these feelings, and of course, that's part of being created in the image and likeness of God because God had feelings and things happened and floods occurred and Sodom and Gomorrah happened because God had feelings and emotions. But because of sin, our requirement is that we not allow those feelings and emotions to become acted out in sin. We control them. And
that's why we're concerned about this Berlatsky person, because we know that in 2021, they were hired as a communications director for Protasia. And this organization claims, according to this article, to protect minors from sexual abuse by finding value in pornography for children. It normalizes societal attitudes about minor attracted persons. And you and I talked about the verbiage that's used now, right? That's so different, I mean, I was thinking, can you imagine, I'm going to take a quick segue. Can you imagine if you were teaching immigrants coming into this country how to speak English, how you would deal with the subject of pronouns? You know
what my favorite movie is about teaching immigrants English?
What?
Stripes.
Okay. You are dating
the very
yourself.
Beginning of that movie.
You are totally.
So far we've talked about there's a judge that wants religion stripped out of public life, a person being nominated to become a federal judge. There's people criticizing a movie about protecting kids from sex trafficking, who's a pedophile defender. And then the third thing, and this is really interesting, Mark Levins, who has written many, many very good books. He's a very smart lawyer.
And he has
He's
a constitutional background, right?
He's a constitutional lawyer. He tweeted the longest tweet I've ever seen. And I don't remember the day, but it was in August or in July of 2023, talking about what's going on with the politicization of the Department of Justice. And he's talking about how this guy in real life is getting crucified by the Department of Justice. My friend Fritz gave me this years ago, and I found it on my desk. Anyway, and this goes back to the structure of our federal government that the Founding Fathers wrote into the United States Constitution. The checks and balances, the separation of powers are supposed to keep corruption from being able to happen because of the experience prior to the 1770s in Europe and in the colonies was that monarchies had kings and princes, and they had total power over all aspects of government, and you dare not say anything that was against them because they had the absolute power to be judge, jury, and executioner if they didn't like what they heard you say. Even if they didn't hear you say it, it was hearsay presented because somebody heard you, blah, 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 blah. So they said, we got to not have that. We have to be free to speak about our government. We have to be free to have our opinions and our conscience.
And can we just do a very quick shout out? I mean, I don't say I agree with this person by any stretch of the imagination on political things, but thanks to Elon Musk for allowing people like Mark Levin to make tweets like this. I mean,
and to show what Twitter and the federal government had been doing during the 2020 election cycle.
Well, and I think that it's up to us as people, as we tell you all the time, to double check what people are saying. So just because Mark Levin made this long tweet, it's still up to us to make sure that what he's tweeting is correct. But as of this day that we're recording this particular tweet has been viewed over 1.3 million times.
Yeah, it's a good one.
So, let's just give some credit to somebody who's pretty liberal to at least allowing free speech.
So, the way the Constitution sets up the federal government, because the Department of Justice is under the President of the United States in the federal system, the Department of Justice is supposed to be the representative of Lady Justice with the blindfold and the scales. Okay?
So the now it's like this, right? Is that what it looks like now?
Now it's like this. So Mark Levin is talking about how the current persecution and prosecution of Donald J. Trump during this election cycle is actually meddling in next year's election. And he says it's only happened twice before in history. This country's been around 250 plus years. 2 times before, there has been meddling in the election by the Department of Justice. Interestingly enough, the candidate that got meddled with was Donald J. Trump. In 2016, with the Russia collusion thing, and in 2020, when they wouldn't let the Hunter Biden info come out, and they just kept prosecuting him and charging him with things and impeaching him and all that kind of stuff. People, this isn't the normal approach to our elections.
And even Democrats, when that whole thing came out, right, that it was whole bogus and all that stuff, there were a lot of Democrats that said they would have voted differently had they known all that stuff. So again, this is not a Republican-Democrat thing. This is information that we believe that every single person in this country needs to know to make an informed decision. How do you know? A, you got to read and stay on top of things, but B, you got to research. You got to dig down deeper. You've got to peel the layers and find out if somebody is just making a statement because it's their political belief or if it's they're spewing fact. And you know what? Let's start giving thanks to people that are doing things in a factual manner. If you're reading something and you see, you know what? This person, and to believe it or not, I've actually had that happen a couple times where it's a Democratic person speaking and I'm like, thank you so much for at least speaking the truth. I want to hear truth more often. And if you agree with me, put the comment below that you want to hear truth.
And I think another really, really important component to that is when you're reading anything except scripture, have critical thinking skills at work.
I think Jesus wants you to have critical thinking when you read scriptures as well.
Okay.
Right?
Ask him for me. But here's the problem. For the Department of Justice to be prosecuting a candidate for president when the person that candidate is going to run against is the other candidate for president is in charge of the Department of Justice. That's like when I was a kid, they'd have movies about faraway poor countries that did stuff like that. They called them banana republics because they were in South America somewhere or whatever. So we've looked at judges that don't want to support and uphold the First Amendment. They want to be judges. We've looked at how the moral foundation in biblical Christianity and biblical Judaism and the people of the book, generally speaking, it's disappearing, it's dissolving, and it's our responsibility to maintain it. And now, even through the structure of the government, this is what Mark Levins says about what's going on, and I'm going to read it. It's a quote of several sentences. He ends his piece with, the Democrat Party and its surrogates are playing for keeps. A one-party state party that monopolizes the elections, the government, and the culture with no effective competition, supported by the state media, which is largely made up of Democrat Party members or personnel aligned with the Democrat Party agenda. And this is tyranny. This is autocracy, and it's looking you directly in the eye. That's what we want you to consider. Ponder this, and then ask yourself, what can I do to make sure here in Hawaii we don't continue being like this? Because we have similar problems on a smaller scale here. Getting your appointments at the legislature to talk about bills. January's coming around the corner after New Year's. We're going to have another legislative session. If you want to activate your citizenship through the Article 1, Section 1 of the state constitution, exercise your political power. We're happy to help you do it.
And there's a movie, if you haven't seen it yet, you got to check it out. It's Amazing Grace. It's an older movie, not super, super old, but it's pretty old. And it's about Wilberforce. And there's a scene in there where Wilberforce is trying to decide whether he wants to be part of Parliament or whether he wants to be a pastor. And one of my favorite scenes is when he's sitting at the table and he's agonizing over, do I want to be a pastor? Do I want to be a parliamentarian? And somebody sitting at the table says, I submit, sir, that you can be both. And I think that's what we're called to do, to be both involved in politics, but also to be a person of faith and to merge the two, to marry the two, stay involved, because this truth and justice that we say we support and follow, that's what's going to change the world. That's what's going to make a difference.
Correct.
So we appreciate that you're spending the time with us today. But before we do our typical close, Jim, why don't you leave us with one final word of wisdom? Because I know that as you were reading this, there has to be something that really struck out for you, Jim. What struck out for you in this?
Well, the losing team. This country, this state is not owned by people other than you individually. We all have a vote, equal vote, one vote each. We own this country. We own the government. We have to exercise it. I could do the restaurant example. I could do the neighbor's car example. Those are in other shows. Go look them up.
And so what you need to do right now with your action and with your choice and with your decision to move forward is like this video, share it with a friend, subscribe, and hit that notification button. So every single time Jim and I upload a new video, which is weekly, we try to do it weekly, you will know, and stay plugged in.
And we wanted to have comments because we want to talk. We can do a whole show on your comments if you send them in. And
you don't have to agree with us. In fact, Jim likes to have conversations with people that don't.
That's true.
Mahalo for listening, and we will see you next week.
Aloha.